Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Tony and Sarah Unscripted. Today, we're back with part 2 of our conversation with our good friend, Dru Levasseur. I don't age.
You don't.
I don't even age mentally. Like, no. I am proud of my immaturity. That's just the way I am. So I'm glad you got used to it.
Oh, yeah.
He got used to it. He's just as mature as I am. I can tell stories, but I won't.
Yeah.
I digress.
And that's what that's some of the work that I'm looking ahead at, is just creating more kind of building power. I had this unbelievable experience last month of being included in this like 500 plus building trans power conference in Minneapolis. It was hosted by the Transgender Law Center, and they flew us all out. I mean, I got an invitation and an email, and it was non-transferable. And they flew us out to Minneapolis and took care of everything. And it was like the best. It was something about, like, I talk about that because it was something about that experience of, you know, all the years I was working at nonprofits, and I would go to a conference and I felt like, oh, well, they're paying for me to be here, and I have to, you know, do the work and make sure I get everything out of it and bring it back to the community, you know. And it was a feeling of like, they're taking care of me. Like, I needed that. And when I got there and I saw on the stage the words building trans power, I'm getting chills. It's like seeing those words on the stage, the word trans on the stage. It was like unlike any other conference where I'm normally like, oh, are they going to let the trans people in? Are they going to be nice to me? Are they going to listen to me? I didn't feel that. I felt like I truly belong here.
Nice.
And it was led by Indigenous folks. Black trans women were like most of the speakers. It was Black and brown trans women mostly. And it was like the people who like are most normally like marginalized at these kinds of, you know, conferences, LGBT conferences. It was the reverse, and it was amazing. I learned so much, you know, like Laverne Cox was there, and Zaya Wade, the NBA star's daughter, and they had just unbelievable speakers. And I have to admit, like, I took a lot of breaks back in my hotel room and was like sobbing, and I was like, what? Like, I didn't know how much I needed to be in a space of our community. And I felt so lucky and grateful, but then I also felt like so sad for like the thousands of trans people I knew that weren't invited or weren't there with us.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, for me, it was just another sign that like community is everything right now. And so for my time, you know, at this point in my career, I really want to invest in building trans community, like holding space for people, and also creating that kind of pipeline where we as leaders need to be succession planning. Like, that's something you plan who's going to take your spot. Like, you identify as soon as you're in a position of power, you identify who am I making space for? And, you know, like one of the stories I like to tell is like when I was at Lambda, you know, I did really high profile cases, and I did, you know, all this work, and I was on the evening news, and I was very visible, and love to talk about that too. But the cost of visibility, it's not easy. It's terrifying. And it comes at a cost, but it, you know, the impact that we have heard from like you and I being visible, as much as it's, you know, impacted our lives and, you know, our like all the different financial well-being, all the things that we could have done, but we were doing this. We have an army of people who are like, you changed my life. Like, I had people at this conference come up to me, and I didn't even know who they were, and they were like, I saw you. And also suddenly I was like one of the elders and like being the old guard. And I was like, when did that happen? But
Elder,
people are like, you know,
sir.
Elder Levasseur.
Elder Levasseur. I love that.
Awful.
That's
terrible.
Terrible name.
People were like, I saw that, and I knew I could become an attorney. I was deeply in the class. Like, all of this feedback that was like, it was overwhelming.
You didn't even know that you had made.
It is overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. And that is something that I still, like, the woman that came up, oh my God, you know, you saved him. And that, I learned to say it was my honor. That, if you'll hear me say that a lot,
I've
right?
heard you say
it's
that.
my honor. It's my honor. Because I used to say, no. It's just a weird.
Yeah.
Did she listen to our podcast? Because I think I spoke to that. I think she came up to me, the parent that you're talking about. Yeah, that was the art show.
I'm not sure. She bought the 3 Buddha pieces.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Okay. Yeah, there was. Well, just so there was another parent there, and she knew that I was with you on this podcast. She said she listened, and she was talking, and we were just both talking about what you have done for our children, but also for us.
Mm.
I mean, where we were not so long ago as parents.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that you think that you're not doing the work anymore, but as Dru says, your work just continues.
Yeah.
You just don't know that it continues. And also, anytime somebody says to me, "Hey, do you know of such and such, like someone that can help here, or do you know, my child needs this or that?" And I'll say, "Hey, Tony, do you have any?" And he's like, "Okay, what can I do for the person? Can I?
Yeah.
I'll send you here. I'll send you there. Do they need this? Do they need?" Like,
Yeah.
immediately ready to
course.
just jump on
Yeah.
and help
Well, yeah.
as
Yeah.
much as you can.
And I think I feel like part of the process for me being available, doing the visibility and impact on those people, and it is hard to take it in. But what I'm working on right now is thinking about how valuable the work that we've done has been for people,
Yeah.
and then internalizing that to value myself. Like that's been my process with my business, is like realizing I should be expensive. Like what I'm bringing to people is like decades of all of this knowledge around like philanthropy and like law, but but beyond that, I know how to like hold a family and to get resources and to help my community members survive, like in this deep
Yeah.
way. So, I feel like your next phase of like, I think you should be very expensive for that person that's available, that has the knowledge and is available like that. And that's where I like want to like look at other trans leaders of saying like what we're doing is invaluable.
Yeah.
And so how do we make that work for us to sustain and have a life where we get like the feeling that got to the conference, where we get to actually have wellness in our lives as well? Like we deserve to be happy and calm and peaceful and to have that. So, but I think the succession planning and so on, like I wanted to tell the story of at Lambda, like I got to do all these fancy cases. I got to be at the first White House meeting, or the trans White House meeting, and like it was at all these access points. And I worked on like the case with the X gender marker. Most of my work has now been like turned over. I will say that what I'm most proud of my decade at that organization was building trans power from the inside. When I started, I was hired as the token transgender rights attorney. And my mission there of that, and it was at great expense to be the one person at the largest legal, LGBT legal table like that, and to be the one trans person, and to speak up to and not agree with everybody, but to say, what about these issues? What about these poverty issues? What about this? And to be that person was very hard and very
I
scary.
remember those days, man.
But it came, like I needed to that. So it was about making the case internally in that organization that there needs to be actual project. And that mission, I got that, the courage to do that was because they sent me away to this Rockwood Leadership Institute, and I got like 2 weeks of where I got, I was with other leaders and got to learn and think about myself and my own empowerment. And I went back and I was like, we need a transgender rights project. And so I was that pain in the ass person, there, and it worked. And so eventually you started hiring a staff attorney and staff, and, and we built trans power of trans numbers. The representation mattered in there. So we built numbers back then, and it was during the first 5 years I was there, it was all about marriage. It was like, and when we won marriage in 2015, all of a sudden, that's when the backlash that we're seeing right now happened. So suddenly the backlash was like, oh, who's the easiest scapegoat? Who's the easiest target? Trans people. And all of a sudden it was like 70% of the docket was now trans rights work, and it was in the hot seat. So building that, having more trans experts at the table and more trans people leading the work, it was all a mission. So I just want to quickly say that my biggest like success, I feel, was like we hired our first Black trans woman attorney in the 45-year history at the time,
Wow.
Taylor Brown.
Wow.
And this was like, she was an intern, she was a rock star, and she was an intern for the Transgender Rights Project. And then we hired her as a staff attorney and so on. And I just remember thinking, like, I tell this story of like to model, especially for other white folks, of like when I brought a case, it was like, oh, that's great, I'm trans, but I'm a white trans guy. But when Taylor, a Black woman from the South, her vision of the work was next level.
Mm-hmm.
And it really matters who's at the table, you know, and you could see it in the way that she brought the legal claims and the way she approached the work, the way she connected with her clients. It was, you know, it really, really mattered, and it upgraded the work. And she went on to go to the ACLU LGBT Rights Project. She then went to the Attorney General's office in New York, and she just a few months ago was appointed by Mayor Mamdani to be the first inaugural director of LGBTQ affairs of New York City. And the work she's
Amazing.
now she's
Wow.
hiring and
Yeah.
building out a staff, but the work she's doing in New York now is a model for the world.
Right.
So, like, when I tell that
Jesus.
story, it's like maybe your legacy is that case you won, or how fancy your resume looks in this way, or maybe it's the people you invested in
Mm-hmm.
who went on to do the next level, who didn't do it better than you. I mean, that's what for me is like succession planning, is like making space and having younger trans folks believe in themselves and realize that they could actually do, not just do what we did, but do it better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the
love that.
path. And when I would say, when she was introduced by the mayor and took that stage, and
She mentioned you.
she mentioned a couple of mentors, I sobbed, because it was like to know that actually meant something, you know,
Mhm.
like in sponsoring, investing in people. So I hope when people hear this, it's like, you never know how you're really impacting people. Getting back to what
Exactly.
you're saying about the work you're doing with Alex Inc., like creating a space like that, you might be like, oh, I don't know if we're having all the right voices and stuff, but just in your own network, your friends seeing what you're doing, what you stand for, and all the ripple effect, you know, you never know how you're actually impacting people.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at Guilford Pride. I mean, honestly,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is.
I mean, the Guilford, you went to you and Bailey showed up. What was
Yeah.
it, last year? I think you went. It's always a great time, good energy, good entertainment, and you created all that. But like, you know, you just do it. Like, you don't even
Mm.
think about it. You just say, okay, this is something I want to do. Oh, you know what I think, Tony? In December, I think we want to have a physical space for Alex. February, we're moving in the furniture. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
That's how it's done.
That's how it's done. Yeah.
and
yeah.
you are listening to the community.
Yeah.
You're listening to what they need. That's why the groups that we're having at Alex matters, because it's what the community says. Like, what do you need? And the
Yeah.
needs have changed from when
And
we
they will.
first started doing
Yeah.
the work, for sure.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, were you always like this? With like when you were younger, did you have this in you with kind of like desire to do stuff and change, or were
That's
you
a great question.
okay?
So thank you for asking that.
Is that a serious thank you?
I love the question.
It's good. I guess so. I have an older sister who informed me. I always thought that I was just very scared, and she said, oh no, you were the one that would stand up to the nuns and do the thing. And
Oh,
I had never
okay.
thought of myself as like, I'm gonna take this on for everybody. But I guess the feedback I've had with people who are watching during all the traumas of
Mm.
like, you know, I was raised Catholic and my mom was a nun. Thank God that didn't work out.
Whoa.
Oh, you didn't.
Why
oh,
have we not
I-
talked about this?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was a nun, and then, you know, she, thank God, you know, left and met my dad, and my sister and I exist. But we were sent to Catholic school in Connecticut and raised very conservatively. And I think you just talked about like, you know, you knew you were a trans kid. I didn't have the language. I think I have a similar narrative to a lot of folks where like I knew I was different.
Mm.
I didn't have
Yeah.
an awareness of like, you know,
I didn't know the
who
word
I was
either
attracted
back
to, but I was like the tallest kid in the class, you know, that was terrible. You know, all those things. I was trying to be like a good girl.
Hmm.
I wanted God to love me. I wanted my parents to love me. I just wanted to be a good kid. And it was so painful to know that there wasn't something inherently different about me that I was trying to hide, and the shame around that, and not really even understanding what it was and, you know, how that showed up. But when people were bullies to me, I guess, when I was younger, yes, I think that I was always like, that's not okay.
He was always
and
an
it got
attorney.
me, yeah,
Yeah.
and it always got me in trouble. Like I was singled out, I think, by some of like the bully nuns and things like that because
Bully nuns.
There are bully
I
nuns.
Yeah, it's
took
funny. It's just not too
Say
easy
it,
to
say it,
see,
say
but
the
it's
words.
true. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah, and one of them that really impacted my journey. After I went off and I left Connecticut to survive, to be honest, and I talk about that. I just testified or at the state house, recently about that. Just I had to leave so that I could understand myself and find my way, and then come back. But I found out, that she's still at it, and I wrote a letter. I wrote an email, and I said, I said my former name, and I said,
To her?
yeah, and I
That's
said I
fabulous.
wanted you to know that this is how you impacted me, but I ended up surviving, and that I not just survived, but this is who I am. I transition. I'm a transgender guy, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm helping other people and doing social justice work. I also think my upbringing, for my social justice,
Mm.
my desire for fairness and humanity, that I don't know if I would have had the same one, version of that if I didn't have a amazing mom and dad the way that so everything about that upbringing, all the pain, I think the good part was that I saw the world through that lens of like, you can't just sit by.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the did that well, you sent the email.
Did she respond?
Did she
Did not.
respond?
She did not. And I had to let that go, but I had that
Yeah.
email. And it feels
That's
bad. 'Cause
listen, that's
yeah.
I think I
that
felt
had to have felt good for you. Like that's
I felt, I carried a lot of guilt that I knew she was still, hurting people. And, some of that stuff is like, I'm supposed to go back and stop her,
I know.
So I think I had some of that. And I think I just needed to let that go and be like, I hope people, I think I'm just trying to put that into the work I'm doing now of like standing up to bullies and seeing it for what it is. And, yeah.
So your parents were supportive
My
and
parents had their own journey. Like I actually told my more personal story in this chapter. I was the token lawyer in the book called Surviving Transphobia.
token lawyer.
He's a token.
The token
He's a
trans
token.
guy.
Token trans guy,
Token-
token lawyer.
But my chapter was called Your Authenticity is Your Power, Tales from a Trans Lawyer. But I wanted to tell that version of the story of my story and my struggle, because I was out there for, being this like professional and expert and, and the best mentorship I don't know about you guys, but like the best mentorship I've had for people were not the people who were fancy and smart and did everything right. It were like the people who were like, yeah, I screwed that up.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I really struggled here, and I didn't know, and then, but this is how I did it. And I thought about that, like that the impact is where it's people's mistakes that actually makes me feel more human. And so I wanted to tell the version of my story of like, it was a journey. Like it was about like, I never thought I'd get a bachelor's degree. I went to 9 years, 4 schools. I was poor. I was gender nonconforming, queer. I had, different violent things happen just because of how I looked. So I was just it was the 90s. It was just like, it was a different time, Tony's got, as his memoirs, like unbelievable next level story. So mine's just like a chapter of that, but it was the kind of a vision. And so what I talk about in this is exactly with your question is, how were my parents? The moment that I needed my parents the most, like at the beginning, like when I first came out the first time, I think when I was like 17, 18, came out as gay and I tried to be a lesbian for 10 years. The moment that I was most at risk in the world was the moment they had the least understanding. And that's sometimes the way it is because it's new. Like I feel like you teach a lot about that around.
Yeah.
Sometimes like parents need their time to be like, wait, what's happening? What does this mean? And that was my parents. And it was when I was like, I needed you to know this yesterday.
Yeah.
So for me, getting through that and finding support and then for giving them the time to be like, I mean, for my mom, for example, it meant like she was a nun. Everything she believed, and she actually, left the church because she was like, my child is not wrong. And it was such a hard thing, so the love was always there, but it was about everything she understood in the world. So, I know you
let me
relate
tell
to
you,
that.
I love this because that's the truth. We have to give parents time, and a lot of older trans people or other people
Yeah.
say, well, what do you mean it's unconditional love? Yeah, they still love their kid most of the time, but they're just trying to say, well, wait a minute. Like Joe said, like, why would we know anything about
Yeah.
No, I mean, you said
this?
it. You said it right when you said, and you just said it yourself. You had been dealing with this for your entire
A
life,
lifetime.
Yeah.
right? And
They're just getting
they're
it
just
now.
getting it now. So it's the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing. Like Cameron was dealing with something and knew that he was dealing with something, and then and then we get it, and we're supposed to like that understand it right off the
Yeah.
bat, and like,
Yeah.
wait, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
And to my parents' credit, I mean, they came around and they're both the most amazing trans advocates. I've signed my dad
love
holding
that.
signs at, the No Kings protests of trans rights or human rights. And like my mom had testified in 2009 to help pass the non-discrimination bill.
Yep.
And she begged me to be able to do that. That was when I was like, Mom, I'm trying to get a job. Like, why are you going to tell how I played the organ in the cathedral church and all the embarrassing stuff?
You heard it here, folks.
We need to get them
You
on.
heard it here.
We had she had,
Again, somebody have
the-
an organ, we can put
the depression. I mean, all the stuff that I felt a lot of shame
Yeah,
around
yeah.
that but she needed to tell this truth about my struggle of like how, I was the, top of my class. I was the all-star jock. I was very I needed to overachieve to be loved because I knew and so she talked about the struggles behind the scenes of this, like, overachieving, like all these different ways. And it was because, it was just the world wasn't structured to include me at that time. And so it was very powerful for my mom to become, being at the pride. She does the mom hug stuff. And
Oh yeah.
she just posted on Facebook, like, if you don't have a parent, I'll be your parent
Yeah.
thing, like
Oh.
what you do.
Mhm.
And it's so powerful. But like what you were saying, though, about that moment, getting back to Tony and his work, like, I do think that because that is the way for a lot of folks where that the hardest moments that they're having in crisis, where they're coming out and they're realizing this and they don't have the resources yet themselves, sometimes their most loved people that they need them to get it right away don't have that either. That's why the work that you've done, I think, holding families like Sarah and family,
Yeah.
like just that, having an adult trans person who is, okay in life, successful, amazing, like funny,
I'm funny.
Handsome.
Handsome, thank you.
handsome,
I wasn't
handy,
even going to say that.
handy.
Well, ish.
Well, not
You know,
handy, but handsome.
but
Oh,
he fixed the deck this
I
week.
fixed it.
That's true.
But like just having that, those resources are life-saving. That's why I feel, getting back to like some of the work that I want to do, and that I'm like being available. Like most of my career, we would get 7,000 calls a year at the help desk at Lambda, and we would only take a handful of cases a year. So I was seeing thousands of calls of people's worst moments. People like me talk about secondary trauma. I was like, oh my God, look at all the stuff that's happening to us. But no one could reach me. And now I'm in my 50s. I'm at this point in my career where I'm like, I have the flexibility to ask you, what do you need? And could I be of service?
Yeah.
And I am highly available. Like I'm like sponsoring the people that particularly Black trans folks that are in the legal profession. I'm like, how's it going? What do you need? It's like, they're like, leave me alone, chill out. But like, that's
true again. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm just saying that, like, I think the work that we can do as adult trans folks, to really kind of fill in those gaps while people can understand that and then be back, back online, like our parents.
Absolutely. And I think that what helped so much from you was that you didn't judge Joe and I. And you were so helpful to Cameron because you were like, what do you need? What do you need? I can help. What do you need? What do you need? And so it was the first time Cameron
I remember that.
Yeah.
Every time you talk about it, I remember that FaceTime.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah.
first time Cameron spoke to somebody who understood.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you were like, yeah, we can,
Yeah, we can do that.
this. And yeah, we can do this. And Cameron's like, oh, we can? I mean, I felt like he could have got off the call and got off the gurney in the
See ya.
ER, be like, see ya, I'm all set. I know what I can do.
Yeah.
But then you could have been the person that is just like, because we've had people try to turn Cameron against a
Oh
therapist.
God,
A therapist tried to turn Cameron against
no.
us as a family.
Not
And
helpful.
but you could have done that. You could have been like, well, I'm here just for Cameron, and that's it. You guys
Mm.
figure
No,
it out.
I
But
learned long ago.
you knew
Yeah,
that
Said-
you didn't judge us. You gave us our
Yeah.
time. You explained. I'll never forget the one time that I was on the phone with you, and we were telling Cameron he needed to wait till he was 18 to get top surgery.
yeah.
And you were like, okay, so let's talk about your other two boys for a second.
Yeah.
And you said, if they were developing breasts, what would you do? And I was like, oh, I obviously would help them or whatever. And so you were like, you need to look at this the same way
Yeah.
for Cameron. And my biggest worry at that time was, and I'm sure a lot of parents feel this, is that Cameron would regret it and blame us,
Mm.
right? Because you see
Yeah,
these detransitioners come out, or whatever. What do you call them?
I call it changing gender journeys.
Mm.
Changing gender journeys. And they'll say, oh, my parents shouldn't have done this, or my parents shouldn't have done that, and they blame the parents.
Mm.
And that was those few years were terrifying for Joe and I, because we were making decisions for our under 18-year-old child that we knew Cameron needed, but you really helped that.
Yeah.
And so you
glad.
like, those are huge things. That's why when Dru says what you did, you may feel like your work is done, but it has just changed everything about me
Yeah.
and my thinking, and it led me to do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that helps other parents. Like, parents have reached out to me and said, I'm dealing with this with my child. I want to help others. So
Yeah.
we as parents
Yeah.
now, which is a whole other
Mhm.
like line of people, right? Like,
Yeah.
now our goal is to take care of our children, but now you're bringing something in that we have no idea, no understanding of.
Right.
And what can we do? And then how do we also make space for ourselves?
Well,
Mhm.
I realized from the first time I started working with a kid who had parents, because originally I was working with kids who were in the system,
Yeah.
that that kid wasn't the only one that was transitioning. The
Yeah.
whole family was,
Mm.
and we had to give parents space enough to hold acceptance, and then from acceptance go to affirming.
Yeah.
And that's like, affirming and acceptance are two totally different things. So, but you have to. I never judged.
No, you never
Parents.
ever do. And you
No.
had I mean, God, we could talk forever, because there must have been a religious side of things for you,
Mm.
I would imagine.
Mhm.
We had a couple on, Tim and Eddie,
Yeah.
who spoke about how them being Catholic, particularly Eddie,
Mhm.
he could not accept being gay, because he's
Mm.
like, I was sure that I was going to go to
Yeah.
hell, that God was going to hate me, that
Yeah.
all of these things that nobody was telling him, but it was just
Yeah.
growing up in
Yeah.
that Catholic
Atmosphere.
faith
Yeah.
and atmosphere.
Yeah. I mean, I think the work, I feel like I also follow Tara Brach,
So do I.
Tara Brach.
Tara Brach.
Just a lot of what she talks about is that underlying fear, like the feeling that people have is that there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like, she tells this story about the woman on her deathbed, and right, the last
Yeah.
word she said, like, all of my life I thought something was wrong with me. And I think I can pinpoint the teachings of like what I was raised with, of like, I know where that came from,
Yeah.
because I was being told something was wrong with me. So, when I heard Laverne Cox speak at the Building Trans Power Conference, she's got a new book out, and she talked about her 3 sections are called like, what's wrong with you? And then section 2 is what happened to you. Oprah, right? And
Yeah.
then section 3 is what's right with you. And I feel like that's a
Yeah.
journey that a lot of us are on, not just trans and non-binary people, but
Yeah.
like all of us who are kind of feeling like, I mean, everybody can relate to feeling like there's something like different about me, and do I belong? And that feeling of like, that authenticity is your power piece, that relates to everybody. And so the journey that we're talking about is not just about your child transitioning. It's about, anybody like accepting a little bit more of themselves, and like allowing themselves to be who they are in the world is good for everybody. It's good for business. It's good
Yeah.
for,
Yes.
you know what I mean? So,
I remember one of the saddest things Cameron said to me is that he wished he wasn't transgender in the beginning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because he knew what that meant as
Yeah.
far as what his future would be like. And if he could be happy with being a girl, he would have, or
mm,
his first
mhm.
choice would be being born as a boy.
Yeah.
And his second choice would be, could I be happy as being a
Yeah.
girl? And he tried every way possible, I
Yeah.
guess, as you
Yep.
do, right?
Same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, that sounds very
dressing really
normal.
girly and getting his nails done and
Yep.
then he was like, oh, maybe I'm just a lesbian and, all this stuff. So, and then the other thing that I found so interesting and this was a couple of years ago, he was having a really tough time. And he said to me, I could have continued being who everybody else wanted me to be and be so unhappy
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Or I could say I need to be who I am
Yeah.
and accept that I was losing except knowing that I was going to lose a lot of people, which he did. He lost a lot of people.
Gain
That
new
was
people.
and gain new people. And that was the
Yeah.
best decision for him. But there was times where he was very lonely because he
Yeah.
had no friends,
Yep.
no community yet.
Yep.
That was the most important thing,
Yes.
was finding that community.
And I remember that
The
day at
filtering.
North Haven. Every time,
Yes.
I did this art, like, draw with like how to be kind to yourself, stuff like that in North Haven. And I was leaving and she was sitting in her car. So what are you doing? Well, I'm hoping he's going to make some friends. And he made a friend
there
two
was a
or
bunch of them
three.
that came out.
But
But
then at his birthday party, how old was he then when you had at that little
18?
18.
Yeah.
And I leaned over. He was leaving. I said, look at him. And he was leaving with all these friends. He had all his
Oh.
friends. And
Yeah.
so it does happen.
Yeah.
It does.
But community
Yeah.
matters because,
Yeah.
if you asked me what community it was like before last June, it would have been a totally different thing. But really, community can bring you through and help you and guide you through the most hardest times in your life. And I have to say that the two of you are part of my community, of course, but you have helped me through the most hardest part of my life. The two of you together, I don't know what I would have done.
Mm.
So it's important to make those connections.
Yeah.
And look at that. I'm not even part of the community. And
Well, you
and
are
I'm-
part of
and
my
I'm-
community.
And I'm part of the community.
You are part of the community.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, you're not getting rid of us.
Yeah,
so
you're not gonna.
it's like another filtering that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's it's funny because we can be talking to each other and like either he'll call me struggling, I'm calling him, but it always ends up that we're laughing our asses off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Humor
It's
is essential.
just it can live together like joy and sadness. You can heal and hurt at the same time. So, but you do bring a lot of laughter, sometimes not on purpose.
You're laughing at me or with me?
Well,
I'm laughing
yeah.
with you.
I'm laughing with you. We can't wrap up here without talking about
What?
the best friend, my best friend.
Oh, Lynn.
She's
He
going to be
got-
so
Because
happy.
I just watched the clip.
She is going to be
Oh,
so
yeah.
happy.
Lynn.
She's going to be so happy. But when Tony would talk
Shout
about
out to
you and
Lynn.
he'd be like, my best friend Drew, I was always like, I always think it's so funny when people say best friend because they're like, listen, Sarah, as close as we're going to get, that best friend's already taken.
The spot's taken.
Yeah, spot's taken.
I mean,
and I usually say BFF.
Yeah, my best friend.
yeah,
So,
Forever.
Yeah.
but I never once forgot Drew's name. Never.
Well, that's because Drew. Well, listen,
Nah,
I didn't forget that last time.
Lynn listened to the last one and she's like, now I'm Jen. I'm like, yep, I just switched your
Jen.
name.
Yeah, I don't know where
I
that came
just
from.
switched your name to Jen.
Listen, Lynn, I know who you are, and I love you dearly. And I get really nervous when she asks me a question. That's the only reason why I screw that up. But Lynn is Sarah's best friend, and Drew is my best friend.
There we go. And I did ask Lynn, I'm like, you should come on sometime. She goes, absolutely not.
No.
Oh my God.
Oh, she
Well,
was-
could we have
Absolutely
coffee
not?
or
Oh, no.
something? Maybe we should meet for lunch.
yeah, we should definitely do
Anyway.
that.
All right, so I think we have to wrap it up.
I know. Yeah.
Drew, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, it went by really fast.
It did.
It did, and it
Oh,
was
yeah.
so amazing to see to learn a little bit more about you, but all the work that you do and continue to do, and
Same.
it's just amazing stuff. And I'm thrilled that Tony has brought us together.
Yes.
Yay.
And thank
Maybe-
you for the work that
Maybe
you...
we'll just shove Tony out of the.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not?
We're like Tony.
Then
I'm
you'll have
meeting.
to change the
I
sign.
feel like meeting. I'm meeting Drew. He's like Drew.
Drew.
Well-
Cover Tony, put Drew.
Drew and Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the community that you guys are creating by having this dialogue. And I think you don't even know how many people are just listening and watching, and hit subscribe.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's really, really important. And there's a lot of people who maybe are not ready to be in a room with other people or not out to themselves yet. Who knows, who are just needing a little support, and you're actually putting that out into the ethers and helping a lot of people. So thank you for the work you
Oh
do.
my God.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thanks for having
on
me.
the show, Drew. Hey, listen, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.